Recently, I've been working on improving the sort of organization of my workshop. So the hammer racks behind me, you can see there, that was something that I've done recently to open up some floor space. So I've got more space as I'm moving around and working in the workshop. Today, I'm going to be following on with that theme as I'm going to be bolting down one of my vices so it's much more secure and actually usable. This is the vice that I want to bolt down. As you can see at the moment, it's very wobbly. The floor isn't very flat, which doesn't help. But I used to, you can see the swage block here. The swage block used to be weighing it down on the bottom, so it didn't move anywhere. But now I want to actually be able to use the swage block, so in another video I'm going to be making a stand for that. Because this now doesn't have the swage block on it, it's really light. And you see it just moves all over the place. So literally as I'm hammering on it, it will just move the vise rather than actually forging and moving the steel. To actually bolt it down, I've drilled some holes there on the bottom run, you can see, one either side, and then welded on some tabs at the back again with some holes in. There's one back there as well. But that's so that I can then bolt it down, and I'm going to bolt it down rather than like screwing it or whatever it is. Bolts is going to be the best way to do it really. So we need to drill some holes, cut some threaded bar, and then resin that threaded bar in and bolt it down. Those little 4 spikes there, as you can see, are where the swage block used to rest to hold it down, to weigh it down. So this is where I want to bolt the vise down, and the reason why I've chosen this spot is because I can now get on both sides, if you see what I mean. There's a nice gap for me to be here, so I can work. Generally, the most common thing that I do in the vise is forging animal heads. And so I like to work on this side when I'm doing most of the face, and then for whatever reason, when I'm doing the left-hand eye, as you're looking on it from the front of the face, I like to do it from this side. I don't know why, but I always do it from this side. It's one of those sort of habits that I've got myself into and now can't get out of. So I like to be able to get at both sides of the vise, as well as obviously being at the front of the vise. But that means that here, you can see on the wall, we've got a nice space there for me to go and a nice space there in between the vise and the fly press. So I can get in on both sides of it and at the front. There is something to be said about not bolting the vise down. Like all my anvils, I don't bolt any of those down because it's really useful to be able to quickly move them out of the way. You know, when you're doing bigger stuff like railings or anything like that, and you need the space, it's really useful just to be able to literally move them out of the way rather than having to unbolt them, lift it all off, and then move it like that. You know, it takes a lot more time, whereas being able just to move it is really useful. It's also obviously useful for the videos so that I can move things into a better place so I can set the camera up. But that's sort of, you know, that's more of a YouTubing thing rather than a blacksmithing thing. In the past, if I've ever been doing loads of grinding, I like to do it outside. And so again, having a vise that isn't bolted down, you can then easily just pick it up and take it outside. The reason sort of why I'm wanting to bolt this one down is because I want a nice secure vise to be forging on, but then I also do still want a vise that I can take outside for grinding. However, I've got loads of vices, I just don't have the space to have them on a stand. So what my thinking is to make a stand, store it at one of the sides, and then in the morning when I get in, open up and then just take it outside. So if I'm ever doing any grinding, I can do it outside, or if I'm doing any heavy forging, I've got a vise bolted down nice and securely that I can do forging on. Here's my threaded bar. I've obviously got to cut it into 4 pieces, which we're then going to resin into the holes. That's going to be the best way to get them to stay in the ground, is just an epoxy resin to make a chemical anchor to the floor rather than, you know, relying on a wall plug or something like that. Just do an epoxy resin fit into the hole and it's never going to come out then. I need to cut this, of course, into 4 little pieces, and I'm not going to clamp it in the vise, as if you clamp it in the vise you just ruin the threads. So I'm just going to hold it and then come in with the angle grinder and make my cuts. I've I've got the vise where I want it to be, so I can go through with my drill, mark where the holes are going to be, and then drill them to the correct depth. Unfortunately, this concrete pad isn't quite as thick as I thought it was. It's pretty thick, but I'm pretty sure on these two holes I've gone through, it seems to be a bit thicker at the back. But here, I think I have gone through and hit sort of gravel or something underneath, but it's bottoming out, so that's okay. We've got a pretty decent amount of depth on them, so we should get enough of a adhesion with the resin and have enough of the bolt actually into the concrete. Unfortunately, I've managed to get the wrong cartridge gun for this resin, and so I'm going to have to push it out by hand, which is a little bit annoying, but it's okay, we can do it. So I'll just ram this in there, get this resin out. So this is just epoxy resin, effectively, and this is the stuff that I use for railings. So it is pretty strong stuff. You saw me there using the airline to get all the dust out of the holes, and that's really important, so you get a good adhesion with the resin. Give this a mix and then get it into our holes. You see, I've managed to get all that resin in those holes. So when we put the bars in, if there is any sort of splurging that comes out the side, we can just leave it and then chisel it off once it's cured and is nice and hard. The resin's cured, so it's gone off. They're nice and secure in the holes. I'll move the vise over the top and then we can bolt it down. So here it is, you can see it's bolted down, it's not going anywhere. It's actually going to be really good to use this in the day-to-day stuff, so I can be hitting on it and it not moving all over the place, so you know we're getting more of the force going into the workpiece rather than in moving the vise all over the place and me having to chase this across the workshop. There is something to be said about not bolting things down. As I mentioned before, it's much easier then, you're much more flexible in your workshop space as you can move things out the way when you need to move them out the way if you're doing bigger stuff, or you know, like you can store things and then get it out, like with the swage block. So the swage block, I'm going to make a stand for that in a video to come soon, but I'm going to be then keeping that sort of away in a corner somewhere, and then whenever I need the swage block I can just drag it out rather than bolting it down in a specific spot where it can then easily get in the way. It's been a pretty short video for today, but I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next one.